Welcome to another deep dive, this time into a really tragic story that one of our listeners sent to us.
Yeah, this one's pretty heavy.
The case of Audrey Scott from Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
Our listener sent in this episode of Anatomy of Murder. And wow,
Yeah.
it really, I think, illustrates
Yeah,
a lot of the things that we talk about here.
it does.
Domestic violence and the way that it kind of sneaks up on you. It's not always this big blowout right away.
Yeah,
It's a slow burn.
right.
And, in this case, we get to see who Audrey is
Right.
through her mom and her sisters and her friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she seems like just a really wonderful person.
Yeah, she seemed very dedicated to her kids.
Right from the very beginning,
Yeah.
even as a teenager herself,
Yeah.
bringing lunches to people through the Salvation Army as a 14-year-old. I mean,
She was a teen mom herself.
yeah.
And then even beyond that, she wanted to open up a group home
Yeah.
for troubled teens.
It's really pretty ambitious and says a lot about her character.
It does. It speaks volumes about her empathy.
Right. And her drive to make a difference.
And also, even that hashtag Scots for Life,
Yeah.
it really emphasizes the strength of their family bonds.
Right.
They really were.
I mean, they seemed extremely close.
Yeah. And I think, that just makes it that much more sad
Yeah.
that this happened to her,
Right. And in this particular case, it really does kind of pull back the curtain
Yeah.
on domestic violence and how insidious it can be.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like a sudden explosion.
Right.
It was this gradual
It was a slow burn.
escalation of control and abuse.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's so scary about it
Right.
is that, if it was something that was really overt,
Maybe open. Yeah.
she would have gotten out of there.
Right.
But in this case, her boyfriend, Sammy Miller,
Right.
really, isolated her from her support system.
Yeah.
He was keeping her important documents. Yeah, a classic tactic that a lot of abusers use
Yeah.
is to keep those documents so you can't leave.
Right. Because then you can't get a job. You can't get an apartment. You can't
Yeah, you can't do anything.
really do anything.
That's right. And I think this case,
Right.
it underscores the importance of recognizing these red flags early on.
Yeah. Are you seeing any of this kind of thing
Right. Have you ever been in a situation
in your own life or
where you've witnessed someone,
people you know?
exerting this kind of control
Right.
over a partner or a friend?
Yeah. It's a
That chilling thought. And
It's a reality.
and in this case, it escalated,
Yeah.
from verbal abuse to physical assault.
Yeah.
And there's this one point in the episode where her young daughter, Adriana,
Mm-hmm.
actually sees Sammy choking Audrey.
Right.
And that's such a
That is such a
crucial
I don't-
moment because it shows the ripple effect
Yeah.
of domestic violence.
even if the child isn't
That even if the child isn't the target of the violence,
right.
witnessing that can be extremely traumatic.
Yeah, and I think that's something that sometimes we don't think about.
Right.
If the child isn't being physically abused,
Right.
the emotional and psychological impact
Mm-hmm.
can be profound.
It can.
So I think that's something that
Right.
if you're worried about that,
Exactly.
pay attention to the kid's behavior as well.
Absolutely. And they suffer in silence a lot.
Right.
And in Audrey's case, it wasn't until she saw another domestic violence murder on the news
Yeah.
that she finally told her mom what was happening.
Well, so it took that external event
Yeah.
to break through.
To kind of break through the denial and the fear
Right.
that traps people in these relationships.
Yeah, and it's hard to leave those situations.
It's never easy to leave.
And even though she had moved back in with her mom,
Right.
she kept going back over to Sammy's apartment to
Oh,
get her belongings.
Try to get her things back.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's tough.
and that's the thing is that
Leaving is a process. It's not an event.
right.
And it's not just
Yeah, and that brings us to
one thing.
the law enforcement angle of it.
Exactly.
Because Audrey's mom Carrie was
Mm.
really frustrated with how the police were handling it
Yeah.
initially.
At first.
Right, because they didn't take it seriously
Yeah.
right away.
He was an adult.
Right. And so this
Mm-hmm.
really highlights
He does.
how important it is for
Yeah.
family and friends
Family and friends.
to advocate for their loved ones.
Right. To push those cases forward.
Especially
Like,
in missing person cases.
that their loved one is.
And, I was reading about this thing called
Yeah.
the critical missing designation.
Right.
Can you explain what that is?
So critical missing is a classification
Right.
that signals a higher level of risk to that person.
Okay.
In Audrey's case, if she had been considered critical missing,
Right.
the police could have shared her information with the media.
Okay.
So it would have gotten more widely out there,
Right.
which could have potentially helped
Right.
in finding her.
Yeah. And, Carrie really
Right. She had to push
had to push
to get the police
to get them to take action.
to do anything.
Yeah. And while she was doing that,
Yeah.
investigators were working on this parallel track,
Right.
trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah. What happened?
And they got this big break
Right.
from Sammy's aunt.
Oh, yeah.
She gave some pretty
Yeah. Damning testimony.
about the SUV,
Damning testimony.
about the bloody shoes,
Right.
about the rumors that she'd heard.
Yeah. And even that she had heard that Sammy's friend took away his guns right after Audrey disappeared.
That's pretty suspicious.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge red flag.
Right. Why get rid of your guns?
Yeah, why would you do that?
Unless you're trying to hide something.
Right.
Right.
I mean, even if you're not directly involved,
Yeah.
maybe you feel guilty about something.
Right. It suggests that he knew something wasn't right.
Yeah. And
maybe felt guilty.
they found blood in the SUV.
Right.
They did DNA testing.
Yeah.
It was linked to Audrey's family.
That was probably a really
That's,
difficult moment for the family.
yeah, to hear that they need to take DNA samples just in case.
Yeah,
That's a punch in the gut,
Right.
foreshadowing what's to come.
It really foreshadows the worst
Yeah. And then, of course,
possible outcome.
2 months later,
Right.
her remains were found in the woods.
Yeah.
And that's just
Yeah.
devastating. I can't even imagine.
I know.
Carrie talking about how she went to the
And the morgue.
and she saw the bag marked left foot.
It's a bag marked left foot.
Yeah.
It's awful.
It's just a terrible thought. And,
That's just chilling.
she even talked about the smell,
Yeah.
and how it just lingered.
That smell of decomposition.
Yeah. And, that's,
Yeah.
it's just this reminder of how
Yeah.
trauma is not just,
It's not just emotional.
right.
It's physical and sensory as well.
right. And it's also
Yeah.
a reminder of the dehumanizing,
Yeah, it really brings
What's this?
home that dehumanizing nature.
this kind of violence,
Yeah.
reducing a person.
Yeah. Reducing a person to just
good.
it's a collection of body parts,
Mhm.
stripping away their identity and dignity.
Yeah.
But I will say,
Yeah.
in the face of this unimaginable loss,
Right.
there was still that determination
Yeah.
to find justice for Audrey.
Right.
And that's what I think
Yeah.
is so inspiring about Carrie.
The episode goes on to
That's-
describe how the investigation shifts gears,
Mm-hmm.
and how
And it was the testimony
they ultimately arrest
of Larry Brown and Sammy's aunt
Right.
that really made the case
And it's
for the prosecution.
Larry in the end.
And this is where
Right.
those cooperation agreements we
Right.
talked about come into play,
Right.
that they were offered reduced charges or sentences
Yeah.
in exchange for their testimony.
Right. And so in a way,
So that's how they were,
their willingness to do that.
were able to build a stronger case against Sammy.
Yeah.
But Sammy maintained his innocence throughout the trial.
Right. He kept saying he didn't do it.
He did,
Yeah.
even going so far as to
He tried to
try to shift the blame
shift the blame onto Larry.
onto Larry Brown.
Right.
But as we said earlier,
But Larry didn't have any
Larry had no motive.
motive.
Right.
He didn't.
He didn't have any.
Sammy, on the other hand, had this history of violence.
Yeah.
Right.
Sammy had a history of violence,
And a very strong desire
a strong desire to not
to not go back to prison.
go back to prison.
Right. And so that coupled with possessiveness and jealousy,
Exactly. Yeah.
it paints a
Puts
pretty
the clear picture
compelling picture
of what might have happened.
of his potential motive.
Yeah. And, it's worth noting, too,
Yeah.
that the episode does address the issue of race.
With race.
Yeah.
And how it may have
Its potential impact
potentially impacted the
on the justice system.
justice system.
Yeah. Carrie voices her concerns
Mhm.
about racial bias.
Right.
And how important perception is,
Yeah.
when
Especially for
families are
families going through
have
something.
to be so traumatic.
Something as traumatic as this.
And so when, we have to acknowledge
We have to acknowledge
those
that.
concerns and work towards a system
And work towards a system
that is fair and equitable.
that is truly fair and equitable.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the goal.
Right.
But let's shift focus for a second and talk about Audrey's legacy
Yeah.
and Carrie's push for this purple alert system.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
a tangible way
Yeah.
to honor Audrey's memory
Tangible way to honor her.
and to prevent
and to prevent
other families
from experiencing this.
from going through
Right.
something
Right.
similar.
So can you explain what that is?
So the purple alert is modeled
Right.
after the amber alert,
Okay.
but it's specifically for adults
Okay.
who are missing under circumstances
Okay.
that suggest that they might be victims of
Interesting.
domestic violence.
Okay.
So it's a way to raise awareness
A way to raise awareness quickly.
quickly,
Get people looking for missing persons.
get people looking,
Right.
and hopefully before it's too late.
Right.
And the episode encourages listeners
Yeah.
to visit change.org to learn more about Carrie's efforts, right? And I think that's a
Yeah.
testament to how one person's
It really is.
tragedy can
Yeah.
spark a movement.
It shows how one person's
Tragedy
can spark
Right.
a movement for change.
Yeah. But let's take a pause there.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground already,
We have.
and we'll pick it up
Yeah.
in just a minute.
Okay, sounds good. So we were talking about how Sammy's aunt was like this key witness in the investigation.
Right.
You know, her testimony about the SUV and the bloody shoes and what she'd heard, you know, it really started to like connect the dots for investigators.
Yeah.
She even mentioned that she'd heard that Sammy's friend took away his guns right after Audrey disappeared.
Yeah, that's pretty suspicious.
Yeah, it's a huge red flag.
I don't know, why would you do that?
Right. Why get rid of your guns unless you're trying to hide something?
Right. Even if he wasn't directly involved.
Right.
Maybe he felt guilty about something,
Yeah, exactly. It suggests that he knew something wasn't right.
Right. And maybe even felt guilty about it.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the forensic evidence.
Right.
They found blood in the SUV.
Mm-hmm.
Did DNA testing.
Yep.
It was linked to Audrey's family.
Right. And that was probably a really difficult moment for the family.
Yeah. To hear that investigators need to take DNA samples,
Yeah.
just in case.
Just in case.
That's like a punch to the gut.
Right. It really foreshadows the worst possible outcome.
Yeah. And tragically,
Yeah.
2 months later, her remains were found in the woods.
Yeah. And, Carrie talked about going to the morgue
Yeah.
and seeing that bag marked left foot.
It's just a terrible thought.
It's awful.
And she talked about the smell.
Yeah.
You know how it lingered?
Yeah. That smell of decomposition.
Yeah, it's just a reminder of how
It's a chilling detail.
trauma is not just emotional, but it's physical and sensory as well.
Yeah. And it really, it brings home that dehumanizing nature of violence.
Yeah.
Reducing a person to just a collection of body parts.
Mm.
Yeah. Stripping away their identity and their dignity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I will say, even in the face of this unimaginable loss,
Right.
there was still that determination
Yeah.
to find justice for Audrey.
Yeah. And so the episode goes on to describe how the investigation shifted gears,
Right.
culminating in Sammy's arrest and trial.
Right. And it was the testimony of Larry Brown and Sammy's aunt
Right.
that really made the case for the prosecution.
Right. And this is where those cooperation agreements
Yeah.
come into play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were offered reduced charges or sentences
Right,
in
well-
exchange for their testimony.
Right. So in a way, their willingness to cooperate
Right.
helped secure this conviction.
Right. It helped them build a much stronger case against Sammy.
Right. But Sammy maintained his innocence throughout the trial.
He did.
Right. He kept saying that he didn't do it.
Yeah, even going so far as to try to shift the blame onto Larry Brown.
Right. But as we talked about earlier, Larry didn't really have any motive.
Right. He didn't have a clear motive.
Right. And Sammy, on the other hand, had this history of violence
Yeah.
and a very strong desire to not go back to prison.
Right. A very strong desire to stay out of prison.
And so, all of that coupled with possessiveness and jealousy,
Exactly.
paints a pretty clear picture of what might have happened.
It paints a really compelling picture of his potential motives.
Yeah. And, it's also worth noting that the episode does address the issue of race
Right.
and its potential impact on the justice system.
Mm-hmm.
And Carrie voices her concerns about racial bias
Right.
and how important perception is, especially for families that are going through something so traumatic.
Especially when families are going through something as traumatic as this.
Right. And so, we have to acknowledge those concerns and work towards a system that is truly fair and equitable for everyone.
We have to work towards a system that's fair and equitable for everybody.
That's the goal.
Right.
But let's shift focus for a moment and talk about Audrey's legacy
Okay.
and Carrie's push for the purple alert.
It's a tangible way to honor Audrey's memory
Right. It's a tangible way to honor her memory
and to hopefully prevent other families from experiencing this kind of loss.
and to prevent other families from going through something similar.
Right. So can you explain what that is?
So the purple alert is modeled after the amber alert system,
Okay.
but it's specifically for adults
Okay.
who are missing under circumstances that suggest that they might be victims of domestic violence.
Okay. So it's a way to raise awareness quickly
Right. It's a way to raise awareness quickly.
that people looking for the missing person.
and get people looking.
Hopefully before it's too late.
And hopefully before it's too late, and the episode encourages listeners to visit change.org Purple Alert
Right.
to learn more about Carrie's efforts.
Right. And I think it's a testament to how one person's tragedy can spark a movement for change.
It really is. It shows how one person's tragedy can spark a movement for change.
But, there's another aspect of Audrey's story we need to explore.
And that's the impact she had on the people who loved her.
Right, because her absence leaves a void that can never be filled.
It's really easy to get caught up in the details, of the investigation and the trial and all that.
Right.
But we can't forget that at the heart of this story is a young woman whose life was tragically cut short.
Audrey was a daughter, a mother, a sister, a friend.
Right. And her absence leaves a void.
It does.
That can never be filled.
No.
And, the episode really captures the profound sense of loss that her family, and especially her mother, Carrie, continued to grapple with.
Right.
Carrie talks about how she still catches herself reacting to people who resemble Audrey.
Wow.
And how
it's going to be tough.
The pain of her absence is a constant presence in her life.
Yeah, it makes you realize that the ripple effects of this kind of tragedy.
Right.
It's not just the immediate family.
Right, it's the whole community.
It's an entire community.
That's impacted.
Yeah.
And what's so inspiring about Carrie?
Yeah.
Is her determination to keep Audrey's memory alive.
Yeah.
Not just through her advocacy work for the Purple Alert,
right,
but by sharing her story.
Yeah.
Making sure the world remembers who she was.
I think that's such a powerful act of defiance against the violence that tried to silence her.
It is.
Yep.
By saying her name.
Yeah.
By telling her story.
Right.
We keep her spirit alive.
We keep her spirit alive.
And affirm that her life mattered.
We affirm that her life mattered. And maybe, just maybe, it'll help other victims of domestic violence to know that they're not alone.
And that their experiences.
They're
seen and heard.
And that there are people.
And that there are people who care.
And
people who will fight for them, people who will remember.
Right, yeah. And, the episode ends with a very poignant statement from Carrie. She says,
she just got mixed up with the wrong guy. And I don't want another mother to feel like I do.
It's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
But it's also a call to action.
It is a call to action.
It challenges each of us to be more aware.
To be more aware.
To recognize those signs of abuse.
Yeah, to speak up.
To speak up when we see something wrong.
When we see something wrong.
And
to challenge.
Yeah, and to challenge those societal norms.
The societal norms that allow this type of violence to continue.
And that's really, the heart of this whole deep dive into Audrey's story.
The heart of this deep dive into Audrey's story, it's not just a true crime case. A true crime case.
It's a reflection.
It's a reflection
of this much larger societal issue.
A much larger societal issue.
It demands our attention.
It demands our attention.
And our action.
So
thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes. Thank you for joining us. We hope that Audrey's story has sparked a conversation.
Audrey's story has sparked a conversation.
And inspired you to take action.
And
even small acts of kindness.
Right.
And awareness.
Yeah, even small acts can make a difference. Absolutely.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence,
please reach out for help.
The
National Domestic Violence Hotline.
The National Domestic Violence Hotline
is available 24/7.
Is available 24/7.
At 1-800-799-7233.
At 1-800-799-7233.
At 1-800-799-7233.
You are not alone.